right.
All right, well, I wanted to welcome everyone and thank you for attending. This is actually the third workshop for the development of the Ready, Nevada County Extreme Climate Event Mobility Adaptation Plan. The purpose of this planning effort is to identify the climate-related weaknesses of the transportation system in Nevada County, with the key goal of the study to provide actionable strategies for integration into transportation plans, transportation improvement programs, and emergency response plans for the region. The adaptation strategies resulting from the planning process are intended to help mitigate and reduce the duration and severity of climate-related impacts, and also identify strategies to harden vulnerable infrastructure and reduce risks and address mobility and safety of the transportation system. The consultant team we have assisting us on this project is GHD Consultants and Rincon Consultants. Kendra Ramsey is our project manager with GHD, and I will turn it over to her to do the presentation tonight and introduce the rest of her team.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Tonight we have Mackenzie Clark from our team who will be helping as I am screen sharing. It is not easy to see any comments put in the chat or hands raised. So I've asked her to, interrupt me if there's anything in there that we want to address during the meeting. We can, it's a fairly small group, so I'm happy to stop and have discussion or take questions during the presentation. We'll also have a time at the end for that as well. So either way works. So appreciate all of you for being here tonight. Like Mike said, this is our third workshop. And as I know many of you have joined us on prior workshops, you may be familiar with the plan. We will have a little bit of introductory material in the beginning, but then get into kind of the meat of what is in the draft plan. The draft plan is actually up on the project website and available for public review and comment. So we'll be getting information on where you can find that if you haven't already later in the presentation. So let's see if I can advance my slide here. Great. So we will go into project background, talk about the impact assessment that really formed the basis of the plan. Then really the meat of the plan is the adaptation concepts, and then we'll talk about the next steps. And also, like Mike said, GHD has been leading the project. We've been assisted in large part by Rincon Consultants doing a lot of the environmental analysis. We will have, any questions that are on specific areas of their expertise. We will be able to get back to those after this meeting. So any questions or comments you have, we'll love to hear them tonight. So great, a little bit of background about the plan. We know that a lot of work has been done related to extreme weather, climate events, adaptation, evacuation, all of these different topics in Nevada County in the recent past and in years past. And so this study really is building off of a lot of that previous work. We've reviewed a number of previous planning documents, spoken with a good number of local agencies, had a steering committee of members of those agencies really to provide feedback on what prior work had been done, what avenues they'd like to explore in the future, and really inform how we can understand the current impacts and really develop those strategies and adaptation concepts that Mike was mentioning a minute ago. So really the goal of the project is to identify basically how to move the transportation network forward to maintain integrity and maintain, passability during, before, during, and after any climate events in the future. So really creating a blueprint countywide to respond to a lot of different types of climate events. So flooding, wildfires, increasing temperatures overall, landslides, which often result from flooding, and a lot of other climate events that can impact transportation and, as a result, evacuation. So the goals of the project are really to understand where the vulnerability points are. And this is both from an experiential perspective as well as a data-driven perspective. So we've received a lot of information from the public and from agency stakeholders on different observed sort of vulnerabilities, areas of concern, and also looked at both past documented concerns as well as future modeling. So we'll get into that a little bit, but really, understand what those impacts have been and what they're likely to be in the future. So the second goal is to develop strategies that really adopt strategies to adapt to those conditions. So where we've identified vulnerabilities, to really think about how those can be addressed, both proactively in terms of hardening infrastructure, creating additional planning efforts, but also for things that can be done during and following events in the future. A big component of this plan is that third point, community feedback. The local information we've been able to gather from the previous 2 community workshops, as well as our project website and interaction with the steering committee, who are both members of the community and serve an important role in the community as well. So really understanding what that local experience and knowledge is. And an underlying goal throughout the project is to both enable the county to adapt to these current and future concerns, while also maintaining the historic and rural qualities of the county, and really coming up with solutions and strategies that are appropriate for the context. So starting out the project, we really looked at the existing conditions where we are now, like any transportation planning study. So that's both documented concerns as well as what the modeling shows us for the future. And so looking both at, I believe, the most, in a lot of cases, the most recent years of data, as well as that future modeling. So to look at the areas that are impacted currently and what we anticipate will happen in the near future, what the impacts will be for those specific areas. On the screen, you see a fire hazard severity map, of which there are many, both current and future year anticipated in the report. Severity, how large those impacts will be, as you see here with the example of fire. Much of the county is in that very high fire hazard severity zone, and throughout the plan shows that throughout the next several decades, the extent of that very high fire hazard severity increases, the extent throughout the geographic area. And so frequency, we know that a lot of the risks will be happening more frequently, and so really looking at what that means for the different communities and areas, and how the transportation network will be impacted. So the existing conditions, following that, we developed an impact assessment. So really looking at the types of impacts that occur due to these extreme climate events, and what that means for the communities. So, the key areas we looked at were really important: evacuation access and general mobility during and following climate events. You'll see an example here of a bridge that was compromised due to a fire, obviously impassable, and it can create a lot of rippling effects on surrounding infrastructure. Damaged infrastructure, that can be from a fire, or we know that extreme heat can impact the pavement. Extreme, rainy seasons can impact stability and cause landslides. So there are a lot of different concerns that were assessed, and really looking at how they impacted different types of infrastructure. And all of these impacts cause losses to the community, whether that's a health and safety loss, or impact the loss of property and folks' livelihoods, either temporarily or, permanently, depending on what the concerns are. Reduced ability of people to use different modes of transportation when the roadway network is impassable, or when different modes can't access. Obviously, economic losses with all of the above, and then the long-term repercussions of not being able to maintain the transportation network as is, making sure that folks are still coming to Nevada County, and both from an economic perspective, tourism, and for local residents. So building on the impact assessment, we looked at what adaptation strategies and concepts could be developed to deal with all of the impacts that are anticipated. And so there are multiple types of solutions and concepts that were identified. There were planning strategies, which really build on prior efforts. And those tend to be strategies that look at what future planning studies might need to be done, what design standards can be updated to address sort of known deficiencies. We are noticing that with differences in temperature, that different materials might be needed in the future, and a lot of those have been identified. And assessing the preparedness measures and what has already been done and what should continue to happen and what really can happen in the future to help optimize those efforts. And so that really built on a lot of the work that's already been done by many of the local agencies. Operational strategies, those look to address the current practices that are in place to operate the transportation network, really looking at how to mitigate the impacts that are associated with extreme climate events and understand how the transportation network can continue to operate successfully in the face of these effects. And then hardening strategies are those physical improvements that can modify the roadway to ensure that folks are able to use it during extreme climate events, either to evacuate, to if it's a sort of more often climate event, such as heavy rainfall or snow, so that they can still use the roadway network for their day-to-day needs. And then in the event of those severe events, that folks will be able to evacuate safely. So a lot of the solutions and concepts developed fall into one of these categories, and some of them do fall into multiple. So now I'll go through the different types of impacts. Basically, we've set up the plan in this adaptation concept section of the plan. We have each impact discussed sort of in its separate section, starting with this table that shows severity, frequency, geographic extent, and documented risk areas. And this really talks about, this is sort of the high level overview of what we understand from the research, from the impact assessment, and is followed in the document by a set of those strategies that addresses these specific impacts. So for temperature and extreme heat, the impact on the roadway network is often degradation of the roadway itself. So pavement rutting, buckling, railway buckling, and degrading the road in those heavily used areas. So your state routes that carry a lot of traffic, especially goods movement traffic that impact folks' abilities to get the goods and access the services they need. It is anticipated that extreme temperature will be more likely in the future, will happen more often. And so this damage to the roadway will occur faster than it currently is occurring. And so looking at what those new materials are, what the maintenance strategies are to address sort of these ongoing concerns, and do those maintenance activities need to happen more often in the future, and what that looks like. And then really pinpointing some of the locations that this will be most important to look at. So lower elevations will tend to be hotter, and then the most traffic routes, especially those with the heavier traffic, will be the most impacted. And documented risk areas, that's really, that column was really intended for if this is one of the impacts that has been reported in sort of that initial research and community outreach part of the project. This wasn't really one that has been discussed a lot, because it is one that this is an impact that is anticipated to start occurring frequently in the future, but hasn't had a huge impact as of yet. So some of a selection of some of the strategies and concepts that were developed for temperature and extreme heat. There are a number of them in the document. We just selected some to kind of talk about, to give you an example of what's in the document. So when a roadway is built or rebuilt, a hardening strategy would be to adjust pavement binder grades and implement rut resisting designs. So a lot of different strategies around that physical infrastructure. Upgrades that can be done, so planning, doing technical vulnerability assessments of metal bridges and other structures, and then maintenance strategies include monitoring and developing an asset or implementing an asset management system to monitor the extreme heat impact on maintenance needs. And so again, a lot of these strategies can be done together. They can be done successively. So there's a lot of discussion of that in the document. See if there are any, pause and see if there are any chats, and make sure, you know, if you have a question or comment, you can either put it in the chat. I believe Zoom has the hand raise function may be in Teams, not Zoom, but feel free to put things in the chat, or, you know, we'll come to a point later as well that we can have discussion.
Yeah, Kendra, this is Mike. The raise hand feature for folks is at the bottom of the screen. You'll see a button that says reactions, like with a smiley face. If you click on that, there's the raise hand feature, or at an appropriate time, you can always type something in chat or unmute yourself and identify that you have a question.
I must not have it because I'm sharing my screen. So that's a good reminder of where it is. Thank you. So on extreme precipitation and flooding, there are a lot of impacts, and this is one that we've certainly seen and heard about in the communities during development of this plan. So washouts, sinkholes, damage to unpaved surfaces, making them impassable, obstructing the roadway, power outages, you know, traffic collisions. There are a lot of immediate and long-term impacts of extreme precipitation, and these are anticipated to be larger events and increasing in frequency. So, you know, we had reports of documented these concerns. So, you know, near State Route 49, State Route 174 were the main areas that were commented on. Where I'm sure that they've happened in other locations as well. And so really looking at a lot of the heavily trafficked roadways primarily, but also, you know, other areas near flood control structures. So some of the solutions identified, there are a number of planning practices that can be implemented. And so culverts were an area identified, and I believe this is a photo of the edge of one. So really, you know, thinking about, do some of those structures need to be increased in size due to the changes in the amount of precipitation that is anticipated? Have they been failing, you know, identifying those locations? And we did have, you know, reporting through this process of locations where that's a concern already. And so this already has been documented in many locations. So kind of collecting that information. And then, you know, a lot of the solutions that were developed, they also each identify who the anticipated primary and supporting agencies would be to implement. And so these are really thoughts on, you know, who might take the lead, whose jurisdiction it's in, and who it may also involve other agencies. So that's listed as well. So that goes all the way from, you know, from Caltrans to, for the state roadways, to, you know, NCTC in many cases, the local agencies, as well as local emergency response for different of the strategies and concepts. So snowpack, snow events are anticipated to become wetter because of increased temperatures. And so have some of the same impacts as the increased precipitation, power outages, flooding, lack of mobility due to that flooding, collisions, and roadway obstructions. And so the lower elevations are anticipated to have this issue first, with the higher elevations later. We had a number of locations identified where the localized flooding is already occurring. So those are shown on the screen. So really thinking about how, you know, in the future areas that may keep their snow for longer will, you know, have that snow melting more quickly without the ability to kind of remove it from the roadway and remove that concern. So one of the main strategies here was a maintenance strategy. So really looking at preparing certain routes for increased snow removal activities. We know snow removal does have an impact on the roadway, so making sure that that is sort of operationalized, and that that equipment and those strategies are available before and during those events. So moving on to landslides, as I mentioned before, and as I'm sure many of you know, the landslides can often be due to some of that extreme precipitation and snowpack, and the destabilization of slopes. So a lot of the same impacts as with those water-based issues. So obstructed roadways, collisions, damages to the roadways due to the debris, and limited mobility and limited access to goods and services for residents due to those concerns. So we'll anticipate that these will increase over time. And this is sort of one of the areas that we identified as sort of a compounding and cascading risk, since it is sort of a combination of multiple of the different climate events. And the landslide risks are actually extensively documented and mapped in the appendix to the report. Our partners at Rincon developed quite a few maps that look at the areas that have the greatest risk of having landslides, and highlighted specifically some of the highest use areas as a subset of the areas of greatest risk to sort of identify those high priority locations. But there are a number of these maps that identify what those roadways and areas, specific areas are that this impact is anticipated. So this is sort of the overview map of that, and basically where you see these darker red colors, those are areas where we've developed the more zoomed in maps that show the specific location and the specific roadway that has these impacts anticipated. So hardening, this is one of the main strategies, slope stabilization upgrades those high-risk locations to help stave off any future landslides. That is one of the biggest strategies to combat this concern. So next up is wildfire, which we know that there have been a number of recent and historic wildfires in the county. And we know in the future, we saw that map earlier in the presentation, that the high and very high fire hazard severity zones will be increasing in the future. So this will be a problem for more areas in the county in future years. So significant damage to the transportation infrastructure, a lot of the similar concerns listed before, power outages, drainage issues. We can see landslides following at the next rain event. Obviously, air quality concerns, traffic congestion due to some of the roadways being impassable, and mobility and availability of goods and services can also be compromised for long periods of time. And yeah, this is a concern for much of the county, with specific most high-risk locations documented in a series of maps in the appendix of the report. And this is sort of looking at the change in risk between now and 2090. So you see that we have both the sort of medium emissions scenario and a high emissions scenario. So basically the likely case and the worst case scenarios. So you see that just that kind of middle elevation area is really increasing in severity in both scenarios, but obviously under higher emissions, it's increasing more. So a lot of the solutions for wildfire, operational solutions. So we know that many of the agencies within the county have undertaken great efforts for hazardous fuels clearing, defensible space activities. There's an example map of different schedules for roadway treatment as an example, but we know that this is going on and is a high priority. And so just amplifying that and improving improving the ability of agencies to do that through a number of methods. Prioritizing electrical pole clearing and maintenance. So I believe this is one of the areas where a partner agency or the lead agency for this would be, the utility provider, making sure that that's taken care of. And then hardening, again, is a utility concern. Electrical undergrounding has been shown to be a good strategy for reducing those fire risks. So these are some of the strategies for wildfire, with many more discussed in the plan. So related solutions, as I said, there are a number of sort of overlapping and compounding effects. Evacuation planning and emergency preparedness is sort of one of the underlying concerns of this study. Really thinking about how does the transportation network support folks when they do need to evacuate. We know that all of the communities have done, extensive emergency preparedness and evacuation planning. They continue to do extensive work in this area. We collected a number of, maps such as this, information on planning efforts, information on things that they plan to do in the future, as well as documented a number of methods of communication during these events, as well as sort of the needs for future improvement of those modes. So this is all discussed in the plan as well. So, some of the strategies identified are really solidifying those evacuation protocols and how the information is disseminated. We know that there have been challenges with data when folks are relying on internet-based sources and the power goes out. Obviously, access to that internet resource can be unavailable for many people. Additional simulation, additional planning studies, including micro simulation, to understand the needed improvements for evacuation routes, and then mitigation strategies to address challenges posed on evacuation routes, with many more discussed in the document. Oh, and many more on this page. So there, a lot of planning strategies look around how to get those communications out, how to best work with the public, and really amplifying and building on all of the great work that's already happening, with identifying those areas that are in need of funding, as well as areas in need of additional planning support. So that was this section specifically was heavily informed by all the great work happening currently and the needs that those agencies have already identified. So cross-cutting strategies, there are a number of things that really don't fall within one of the categories, but can assist in developing a more resilient transportation network throughout Nevada County. So, working through and watching Caltrans process as they sort of do their own vulnerability process, the impact of railway and, the safety and viability of their operations, looking at a lot of opportunities to seek outside funding for a number of different transportation options. Transit service was an area identified. There are, some transit users, and it can be a challenge to take transit both during extreme climate events such as extreme heat, but also when the roadway may not be as available. So, one sort of low-lying fruit suggestion, this is an image from a community in Southern California where, they've implemented some nice shade structures at a transit facility. So, not ideal for every scenario, but just given a sort of a nice visual example of some of the low-hanging fruit suggestions. More cross-cutting strategies, a lot of operational strategies identified in terms of, agencies working together to assess vulnerabilities and make decisions, inspections, increasing need for sort of budget resources, and really, identifying what's been working in different communities and how that can be, implemented across the board. Okay. And saw that there was a note in the chat, but it looks like it was a comment on some text in the plan that needs to be updated from Alex. So definitely appreciate that. just briefly go over next steps and then we can have discussion. So if you haven't seen it already, the draft plan is available on the project website. So that's extremeclimatemobilitync.com. We also have a comment form on the website for receiving comments. We're also happy to take them via email. So the information will be available, I believe, on the next slide. And so we'll be taking comments through May 1st, and then we will work with NCTC to, address those comments identified and improve the plan based on those comments. And then we will be seeking, be presenting the plan to the NCTC Commission, hoping for adoption in late May. All right, so we've now gotten to the discussion question comment portion. I will stop sharing my screen now so that I can see all of your faces more easily in the chat feature. So yeah, don't be shy. And I do know, several of you have already provided comments, so we do really appreciate those as well. And we will be reviewing and following up shortly.
So any comments on some of the draft actions or strategies, or if you haven't had a chance to look at the draft plan, are there any, areas of focus or concerns that you have questions about that maybe we can expand on some of the draft strategies or actions related to those specific issues? And Scott, you're a man of action. I saw in your still photo there, jumping into action with your chainsaw while in a suit and tie. So
I noticed that also.
Not to put you on the spot, but if you had any comments or feedback on the draft strategies.
Yeah, I use my Zoom account for volunteer work as a first responder and day job as a financial advisor. So that's the one picture that captures, like, he's professional, but can hang out in a small town and run a 30-inch saw. And was taken during a situation where I was trapped on my one-way street, or my one point of egress in Mannion Canyon, and yeah, had out of necessity. Yeah, I had submitted things to writing. I think, Kendra, you've seen that. In general, I'll just say thanks to everyone who put the time into this. So Mike, Kendra, your team, Terry, I know I saw your name on every document that I read. So thanks to all who put in the time for this project. I think it's definitely needed. And I was, pleased to see just a great breadth of issues addressed in the document. I had some nuts and bolts feedback, when we, as an example, you talk about mitigating landslides. Many of the areas outlined for landslide are kind of out there in the hinterland of Nevada County, where it's, I hate to say it, but live at your own risk. And, if we apply some of those same concepts to the avalanche risk, many of those people already commute quite literally by tracked vehicle to get to, 4 rubber tires to then come into the front country. So again, as this moves on to the implementation phase, which is probably beyond the scope of the conversation today, I just hope that, we have some local common sense applied to that, where we can move away from some of the identified risks that may be high probability events but low consequence, and focus on some of those events that are higher consequence. And I think one of the biggest things that I put in my feedback was related to the amount of people who don't have access to transportation at all. A vehicle in the house is, I think, the survey question from census data that was pulled. We know this was a risk at the campfire. It was quite literally healthcare workers just throwing senior citizens in their personal vehicles to get them out, because that was the best idea of the moment. We know the risk, we know wildfire is coming, and I hope we're doing something about that here. And it's hard to use the word make, but I do hope we are making many of these care facilities come up with their own plan. When the fire broke out, and Terry or Jim, if you can throw a name out, I forget it. It wasn't River Fire. It was the one that was in the like Loma Rica Ranch area. I know
Bennett Fire,
at
maybe.
least one. What was it?
I think it was the Bennett Fire.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah,
It was right there in Bennett. Thank you. So, you know, I don't know how many crews or how many engines were dedicated to just defending those spaces, which is critical for people who can't evacuate. But I hope that in the months ahead, we come up with a better plan for evacuation that involves some type of mass evacuation plan. And with the amount of BRIC money that's out there, I'd like to believe we can come up with some buses and some training for some of the people who work at that care facility. So that was just one example. And then bigger picture, again, I'm rarely in on these planning conversations. I'm more on the response side, and I want to be clear that my words represent zero of the agencies, groups that some of you might know me from. But I do hope some time is put into the response and talking about the response. So that includes things like, you know, having buses available, but also, you know, I know there's an initiative at OES to start bringing together potentially a number of different boats. But we have a lot of people who want to help. I mean, every emergency that goes down, I got people asking me where they can take the homemade cookies that they've made to help the firefighters, or where they can drop off clothing. And I think we could, as a community, do a better job of that response. And specifically in the most recent snowpocalypse event, or whatever we're calling that, a couple months ago, I know that there were a number of 4x4 groups that were kind of on standby because no one wanted to take responsibility for deploying that, which makes complete sense. I wouldn't want the liability of sending a bunch of civilians to the hinterlands of our county, but they are capable of doing just that. And I hope we're able to utilize those people. And then bigger picture things, where if we have a major event that's out town of Washington or North San Juan, I just can't imagine where we would set up a major incident command to run an event like that. You look at the community center in North San Juan, that I think if they have a generator, it's, you know, probably a 20-year-old, you know, 2000 watt, you know. And so I'm, you know, Chief Mathias is more than capable of running an event off the back of his truck, but when the next 100 resources come in, I simply don't know where we would put those people. So I hope that there's some longer range planning for the response aspect of this plan that was developed, because again, the mitigation and preparedness part of it was fantastic, and I appreciate the work that went into it. So I'm, again, just as a guy who's going to be, you know, 20 feet to the right of Jim, trying to work out of the back of my motorcycle as my incident command, I just hope we put a little more thought into that response.
Great, thank you. And appreciate the detailed comments you sent over email as well.
I think the snowstorm that impacted the Alta Sierra area was kind of a prime example of what we've all been talking about and working on in this process. And I'm sure it shed some light on, you know, the future of what we're trying to accomplish here. So I'm sure there were some comments that came out of that storm.
Yeah, there definitely were, Terry. And I think, you know, from our perspective, you know, for us kind of delving into the climate issue and the related impacts to the transportation system, you know, it's something relatively new for the Transportation Commission. In this first planning effort, culminating with identifying the risks and potential strategies, we see that as kind of the first planning effort to get on the ground and really serve as a springboard into implementable actions in future studies. One of the future studies that is a recommendation in this plan, and I think OES has already submitted for a planning grant for funding, is to kind of piggyback off of this effort and do an emergency evacuation plan that also includes some micro simulation of the evacuation routes in their current configurations. And we can model, if we remove certain choke points and different things, can we move people faster or get them to safety quicker? So really kind of a springboard for, looking at more planning efforts and really kind of trying to coordinate with all the different agencies as we are going to continue to face these different climate challenges in the future.
Right, and I think one of the things that we really learned from the fire district is, not one agency can do it alone. If Chief Matthias hadn't have stepped up with his crews, it would have been a long time getting our equipment in and out of Alta Sierra and getting to some of those areas where people needed help. So I think we're all on the right track.
I'll just add that on the climate aspect of things, I appreciated about this plan that it was looking at the different climate impacts as layering, because if we look at the winter storm, good response to the winter storm essentially will translate into good mitigation in advance of wildfire season. And I think that's something that like a lot of homeowners kind of have come to realize over the last month or so. There was so much down debris, and now they're suddenly thinking that it's not just about cleaning up from that winter storm impact, it's about cleaning up because they're actually not wildfire ready if they don't clean up. And having people understand that like nexus between the climate events in particular, as we're going to be like changing quickly across seasons. We're going to have winter storms, and then we're going to get hot and dry, and it could happen very quickly. And the ability as a group to see that response for one translates into that preparedness piece for another is, I think, really important.
It's a great point.
Yeah, and I think too is, citizens, as we go through more of these kind of climate related events, whether it's PSPSs and power outages, or, the river fire and the Bennett fire and evacuation warnings, and everybody logging into Code Red to find out, know your zone and what is my zone. And then like with those power outages, the cell phone towers really, their battery backup system is only good for, about a day and a half before you lose your internet. So it just brings all those things into mind, like, how do we work with those agencies to ensure in these events that, they have generators so we don't lose our cell phone power or our internet that, can be so critical for communication in these events. So it's just kind of a learning process as we go that's been kind of culminating. And I know the experts in the room, know these things, but as a citizen kind of living through them, all these things are becoming more and more apparent and kind of exposing the layered risks that we face and the need to take efforts to mitigate those risks. I see a couple of new names that maybe joined us late. We went over kind of a high level overview of the climate associated risks and some of the kind of the proposed draft strategies that are highlighted in the plan. The plan is available on the project website. Another easy way to get to the draft plan is through the Nevada County Transportation Commission's website, which is www.nctc.ca.gov. And you can link there to the project website and the draft report. But yeah, if anybody that maybe joined late has any particular questions, if you've had a chance to look at the draft plan, or any, maybe if you haven't, any risks or climate related things that you're worried about with the transportation system that you would like to have us maybe elaborate if possible on some of the strategies, we're happy to answer them.
Yeah, this is Marcus. Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm actually looking at the public draft on the second screen, on my left-hand screen right now. I'm looking at page 67, where it talks about upgrade outdated emergency communications infrastructure and develop an emergency evacuation plan. In both of those, it says that somebody should be doing something. Is anybody doing anything? Okay, under the upgrade out emergency communications, it says that Nevada County OES, the county should continue to push for an upgrade of vital yet currently outdated emergency communications infrastructures. Okay, now, is the county actually, the county OES, are they actually working on this, or is this just something that they're supposed to, this is on their to-do list?
They are actively pursuing upgrading that communications infrastructure. It's my understanding that they submitted for federal earmark for that in the last round. And they also recently submitted a grant for the emergency evacuation planning study. That, looking at the criteria, I think odds are good that we'll be successful in getting that planning grant. Alex Keeble.
Okay, and how long are we talking about?
Alex, can you verify if the earmark request for the communications upgrade was funded in the last cycle? I thought all of our projects were, except for the State Route 49 corridor improvement.
Yeah, so for fiscal year 22, and right now we're just working through like the process of like how those funds actually get allocated, because they were associated with a bunch of different buckets. And I would love to follow up with you all on exactly where that's at when I have a bit more information, because we are working through, for instance, funding was also awarded to work on the Ponderosa West extension, and we're kind of figuring out how it gets routed. On the evacuation plan, that was a California Fire Safe Council grant, and we're also waiting to hear back from those folks. We've been bugging them aggressively because I think everyone's getting so many wonderful proposals these days. It's taking them a bit longer to review them and get back to you. So that's another one where if it doesn't get funded, we will definitely be seeking funding elsewhere. And then we do have a number of different FEMA grants that are currently pending through their RFI processes, including roadside vegetation abatement, which I was really excited actually to see at the back of this document, the different maps of the access limited communities, because I think that'll be a really nice way to feed future vegetation abatement projects in through the FEMA process by identifying some of these areas where really if you've only got one way out, let's make sure that way out will work for you in an emergency as best possible.
Okay, well,
I
so
will
then we
say-
actually do have a plan.
If I
We're just
could,
waiting for money. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, there are plans. We're just waiting for funding.
And where can we see where could we see those plans?
So there's no place to see them currently because they are existing as grant proposals that are sitting with various funding agencies waiting to be funded.
But Alex, correct me if I'm wrong,
I-
the funding for the emergency communications upgrade, that was approved, and we're just
Yes.
waiting to get through the process to actually get the funding.
Yes, that one wasn't one I was specifically involved with, but can tell you we'll say 95% confidence interval that that was funded, and they're waiting to figure out how those monies will be allocated. But I would be happy to follow up with you guys with a definitive answer on how and when, as soon as I can meet with my team.
And Marcus, if I could just add that, if I could add that, you know, relative to other counties, which I have deployed from Humboldt to Plymouth to Placer, we have one of, if not the highest uptakes of Code Red and one of the most highest functioning reverse 911 systems in Northern California. We also have one of the best mapping systems in use of the mapping system in Zone Haven. And you can see this. You don't need official government press releases to determine this. You can turn to social media and see the disasters that have been the deployments in other county relative to what we have here. And I'm not joking when I say literally other counties are putting out hand-drawn documents using crayons. In Nevada County, someone somewhere, like Jim, shows up first on scene. Next to him on just a couple-minute delay would be law enforcement and an officer on scene. And it can take just a matter of seconds before the code red button is pushed and alerts have gone out. Our Firewise communities, as a second layer of defense, also have some of the most robust internal communications, ranging from a siren system in the River Valley in the town of Washington to use of FRS radios, you know, in downtown Nevada City. As a backup to that, we always encourage people to have a buddy system locally. So from the government down to individual neighborhood levels, our county is situated as good as any, which is remarkable when you compare our budget relative to the El Dorado or Placer counties of NorCal. So I guess I'm just curious where the term outdated comes from.
Okay, I'm just, okay. I like to see plans, and I'll say not just, you know, say a statement says that a plan is available or somebody is tasked with working on a plan. And if we have a list of equipment, you know, like in communications, if we have a list of equipment that we're gonna go buy as soon as we get the money and how we're gonna use that equipment, I mean, is that available? Is that in place?
Yeah, so I mean,
Okay,
sorry,
I was
Alex.
going to say, do you mean like in specific, like grant funded opportunities? Like is the equipment
well,
listed there?
you know, I mean, if I want to go out and buy a new computer system, then I make myself a list of what I want, and then I, you know, say go find the money to buy it with. Okay, now, but so what I'm looking at is what I'm hearing is that there's lots of funding, you know, say requests that are out there, and we're waiting for that, and we're very confident we're going to get that money. But now, once we get that money, how soon will we be able to turn that money into a you know, say an emergency communication system? Or how soon will we be able to turn that money into a plan that everybody in the county can look at, an evacuation plan that everybody in the county can look at, so they can see, you know, say if we have a fire next week, how they can get out of their house, if that's, you know, say if that's the only way out.
Yeah, I can't give you an exact time frame because I'm not an expert on the communications infrastructure, but I can tell you from the meetings that I attended with the county sheriff and county OES staff when they were advocating for the funding through the federal earmark. They know the communication systems that need to be upgraded, and they have the proposed equipment, whether, and I don't want to try to cite like satellite communications because I, you know, don't know what I'm talking about, but they do have the equipment identified that the upgrade would really benefit Nevada County's communication system. So they do have what they need identified, and it's just a matter of now the funding's been appropriated and working through the process to get the money and then to go out and secure the equipment.
And I
If
would
it
say
takes
that
a
it's
year
safe
to
to,
get that,
and it's safe to say that we can't apply for any grants without having some kind of plan or a list of our needs. You know, we can't just go out and say we need so much money and then to spend it the way we want. So those plans all include the equipment we need. And, you know, it's just a matter of availability and putting everything together before we can move on.
okay, I understand that, but my questions or my concern is that, you know, we live in, you know, say, I'll say, we're living in a, you know, say a 12-month-a-year fire season almost now. And our next fire could occur next week. Well, but probably not next week because it's gonna be raining. But in a couple of weeks, our next big fire that burns up a section of town will occur. And if we have to wait 2 years before we actually get this communication system, this emergency communication system, if we have that, if we are, put this, if we don't have that for the next couple of years, because we're waiting either for money or we're waiting for equipment availability or whatever, that doesn't do us much good right now. And I realize that we can't do stuff overnight, but
Are you
is it
registered for Code Red, Marcus?
possible to see? I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Are you registered
So
for Code Red?
I don't know what Code Red is.
So I popped a few links in the
Okay.
chat that I think will be really useful for you. The first one
Okay.
is Nevada County. It's the Ready Nevada County website, and that's kind of got our dashboard of resources that are available to community members, including the link to be able to sign up to Code Red. I also popped in there for you, Marcus, and anyone else who's interested. The county really is in a position where we want to hear from everyone, residents, what the priorities are for them in terms of like, what are your biggest concerns? So the second link is Preparing for the Future Nevada County. And at the bottom of that, there's an opportunity for you to take a survey where you can actually say like, I'm most concerned about this thing, or fill out in the comment box your biggest concerns. And both OES and the CEO's office are really taking to heart what those concerns are in terms of like, you want to know exactly what types of equipment will be bought with different grant funded opportunities and those types of things. I also put a link to the Zone Haven map in there, which is the dashboard that allows you to know your zone in terms of exactly where you live. And if there were a wildfire crisis, then you would be able to see whether or not for your zone, you should be prepared to evacuate, you should be evacuating, you should be thinking about it if you have large animals or you think it will take longer to evacuate. And then Scott just pointed out to me in the chat that Lieutenant Scales will be presenting on the mapping system at the next Firewise Coalition meeting on May 3rd. So that's another opportunity to like really get into the weeds on some of these things that OES and the county are doing, how the funds are being spent, what types of community outcomes those will result in. So hopefully, if you have a chance to take a look at some of those things, just from like an interested community members perspective, like you will be able to see the breadth of resources that are currently available, and then offer feedback on what's not there that you really want to see, because we are totally interested in hearing what you're interested in seeing and what makes you feel like as a community member you're getting the safety and resilience that you need.
Yeah, and,
Okay.
and just to be clear, you know, the county does have a extensive emergency communication system in place with the Code Red and Zone Haven. You know what we're talking about when we say, you know, upgrading the communications infrastructure. It's really changing the technology and hardening kind of those communication towers. To where if there was a major wildfire that burned in the area of those communication towers, they would keep working. So, you know, short of a major wildfire in those areas, the communication system is in place and is going to function quite adequately. But the funding that's coming through the federal government will be used to harden that infrastructure to make it resilient in the face of a large wildfire that impacts in those communication tower areas.
Okay, thank you.
I'll add from a grant writing perspective, I really commend you guys on not just using CalEnviroscreen, but using additional metrics to identify whether there are disadvantaged communities. Because CalEnviroscreen does typically sort of screen out the rural Sierra Nevada as having vulnerabilities. And that's super problematic when you're applying for state funding where they want to be catering, or at least a percentage of their funding explicitly to disadvantaged communities. So I read, I think it was page 6 and went, oh, dang, they use CalEnviroscreen. And then read the next page and went, oh, yes, that's wonderful to see that you looked at more of a multifaceted metric to identify disadvantaged communities in our region. So kudos to you for doing that.
Yeah, and we do echo that same sentiment with the state in regards to CalEnviroscreen, and advocate for consideration for like the AB 1550 low median income populations and those things that are really relevant in our rural counties. So
Yeah,
thanks for
I
that
will
comment.
credit the folks at NCTC and the folks that are on the steering committee who reviewed the early draft of the existing conditions report for really helping us identify what some of those metrics would be that are more meaningful for Nevada County, because it really is frustrating. CalEnviroscreen is great if you're in LA or parts of the Central Valley, but there are certainly other areas of vulnerability that are important to highlight. And it really takes that local knowledge to identify the ones that are relevant. And then also specifically for evacuation and extreme climate purposes, I was just flipping through and looking at page 9, we have areas where there are more folks with a disability or folks that are over 65, and just high level identifying those areas as a concern. And we know we did get a lot of comments. I think I heard one tonight about making sure that folks that aren't mobile or don't have access to a car have the means to evacuate. So certainly looking at those areas as well.
Yeah, and I would just add, Marcus, if you put your email in the chat, if there's any information we can follow up and share with you, we're happy to.
Definitely appreciate all the comments and discussion tonight. I wanted to mention that while some of the discussion was happening, I did put the link to the website. And again, we do have, if you haven't already looked, which sounds like many of you have, the document is on the website. And then there's a comment form, and you can either use that comment form or feel free to just send me an email with your comments if you feel that's easier. We'll take them either way. And so my email is both in the chat here and then on the contact page on the website as well. And we'll be accepting comments through May 1st.
There was a question by Gary Price. I'm not sure if it was already answered or not in the chat.
Let's see.
Status to the update to the Nevada County Hazard Mitigation Plan. Let's see.
So for that, the local hazard mitigation plan, we've got funding pending from FEMA to do that. We have to do that irrespective within the next 6 months, basically, because in order to continue to be eligible for federal funding, it has to be done. So that, along with an updated community wildfire protection plan for Nevada County, those are kind of two planning documents that we currently are awaiting to hear back whether or not we've been awarded funding. And they are two planning documents that the county basically intends with moving forward and getting done, irrespective of if the funding that's currently pending comes through, because they're just so critical to being eligible for future funding in the case of the local hazard mitigation plan. And then in the case of the community wildfire protection plan, our plan's dated 2016. So it's out of date in terms of having kind of the best available science behind that plan. And we know that. And the hope there, Nevada County is really excited because we are bringing on basically a community wildfire coordinator as a full-time position to help both shepherd through that community wildfire protection plan development process and then kind of continue the coordination beyond, because there are so many people in the county working on excellent projects across all agencies, NGOs, in the Firewise communities, as part of the Fire Safe Council. And our hope is to really bring everything together, at least spatially and from a planning perspective, under the same umbrella, so that people know who their partners are and who they can work together with to actually like piece together some of these smaller random acts of conservation into like larger meaningful projects and action. So those are a couple of different plans that Marcus would probably interest you as soon as they are available. And I know lots of other folks are really interested in seeing those come to fruition because they're just so important.
Yes, I would be interested in that. And I put my email address in there. My concern is not so much here in Nevada County because, so far, I think we're doing okay. My concern is, I have two sisters that live, I have one sister lives in Sterling City, and one sister that lives in Magalia. And both of those were impacted by campfires, and neither one of them got burnt out, but it could have happened. My sister who lives in Sterling City has no cell service there, and she lost power to her landline, so she had no communications, outside communications. And so I'm concerned or curious as to whether or not we're going to do something to take care of people who have no cell service and have no outside line, other than, say, using the buddy system. Okay, my sister who lives in Magalia, she still has cell service and she still has power, but still she has mobility problems. And so I'm concerned as whether or not there's anything going on within Nevada County to assist people who have mobility problems, other than just telling them to rely on the buddy system. So basically, that's why I'm on this call.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
Marcus. I appreciate those comments. And I think if Lieutenant Scales was here from the Nevada County Sheriff's offices, who manages the evacuations, he's definitely more informed than I am on those type of things. But I do know from working with his predecessor on these issues, the county does, when there are evacuations, they do go out into those zones and do go door to door to get those folks out, in case there are folks that maybe don't have internet or don't have phone service, to try to make sure no one is left behind. So they do have plans for those type of scenarios. That's one thing, for the folks that do have cell phones and internet, if we could work with the cell phone providers to get their towers during these types of events to make sure they're on, generator backup rather than the battery backup that runs out, a day and a half into an event. Those kind of things are critical because, communication is the best way to warn folks to prepare and to get out. But then again, like you mentioned, there are those folks that just don't have those options of communication. And then it just relies on kind of boots on the ground and kind of that door-to-door evacuation, which is a little bit more riskier.
Can I ask a total rookie question? Like I have
There's no rookie
this-
questions, no rookie
this
questions.
pressing rookie question because I am very new to OES. But one thing that I was interested in is, and maybe no one here has a good answer to it, but in the opportunities for coordinating with PG&E so that their efforts to clear power lines were more thoroughly integrated with roadside vegetation abatement. Because this is just like me as like a resident just making an observation is that I've noticed that in some cases PG&E will like top the trees below the power line and get as much as they can off the power lines, but not specifically like fully address the roadside vegetation. And I was just curious as to whether anyone had any experience on whether or not it's even tenable to be able to try to like integrate those activities more explicitly so that you could kind of just do both at the same time.
Yeah, I'm not really knowledgeable on that topic. I think the opportunity maybe presents itself a little bit better. We focus at the commission more on some of the improvements to the regional roadways, like the state highway system, State Route 49. The improvements there, that's one project where we'll be coordinating with Caltrans and trying to initiate that communication with PG&E. PG&E does, from what I hear, have an aggressive undergrounding of their infrastructure kind of underway. I'm not sure what that looks like in Nevada County, but we're definitely going to be initiating those conversations and communication with them as we look at improvements on the State Route 49 corridor to see if there's an opportunity to, marry those two projects together, since, typically in those kind of construction projects, they would have to relocate their infrastructure to, make room for the roadway improvements. So if there's an opportunity to underground that infrastructure, we definitely want to take advantage of that.
This is Gary Price. Sorry I came to the meeting a little bit late. I had something else that happened. But anyway, Alex brought up a really good point, and I'm not sure how Reading, Nevada County is integrated with PG&E, but it would seem to me that would be a really good partnership collaboration. So you're not having to deal with 3 or 4 different entities that just go on one website to figure out emergency issues. Just throwing that out as an idea.
It's something that probably Paul and Lieutenant Scales like have an answer to, and they're just not here, and it's not something I've asked them yet. But I'm always looking for opportunities for collaboration, and that's why these kinds of plans are so great, is that they kind of lay out what the issues are and then sort of open them up to folks to figure out how to best work together. So thank you for
Want me to help
trying
you
to answer my question. Oh, great. Thank you.
out? Okay, so Jim Mathias from CAL FIRE. So we're talking about the downed trees underneath PG&E power lines and along roadways. So yeah, PG&E has a responsibility, in varying levels to take care of the trees around their power lines, especially when they cut them down. Now, if they fell down, that might be a different scenario. So as a homeowner, you can always call PG&E and see if they are willing to come remove that debris. They certainly don't know about every road. And on the public roadways, Nevada County already has a grant for a bunch of removal from a lot of the public roadways. They can't hit every road every year, but they're doing a good job with removing some of the hazardous vegetation along the roadways within their right of way. And then speaking specifically to Snowmageddon and the results of all the downed trees from that, CAL FIRE's added another $950,000 to the grant that we already gave Nevada County to help out with some of that removal as well. So they'll be implementing that as soon as they can, and they're moving at the speed of government, which we all wish was a little bit faster sometimes. But there's a system of checks and balances that we have to work through in order to get the contractors out there to actually physically do the work. So in answer to your question, Gary, there's a couple of different things. Homeowners can call PG&E if it's a private roadway and see if they can come remove it, or a public roadway. If it's underneath and it was part of a PG&E tree removal or tree clearance, you can call PG&E and see if they can come remove it. And then the county's working as quickly as they can to implement those grant programs and get fuel reductions, specifically with that extra money that we just added for the storm debris and for evacuation route safety. Hopefully it helps you out.
Yeah, certainly,
Thanks,
totally
Jim.
appreciate that. For future efforts, though, like for future actions that PG&E might take, I think I was trying to dig a bit more into like when they're planning on removing branches that might be like too close to their lines, those types of activities. Is there like any latitude there for partnering with them so that when they're
It's a
removing,
law, they have to remove it. So
Yeah.
it's part of the Public Resources Code. And there's certain, for the different kilowatts that are carried by the lines, there's different spaces that they have to remove it. So it's an annual, actually, it's not even annual, it's a daily thing. They're supposed to be out inspecting their lines and removing that. And like everybody said, they're pretty aggressive with that, and they're doing a pretty good job, I would say.
Awesome. Thank you so
And I
much
think-
for indulging my rookie question.
I think also too, Paul at OES he has a great communication and working relationship with PG&E and keeps in pretty good contact with them. So I know he's working on it from the OES side.
Yeah, and Alex,
I
I'd
think
be
my
happy to,
question- oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, I'd be happy to follow up with you and Paul offline, so we can kind of talk about coordination and opportunities with some of the improvements we're doing on Highway 49, to try to coordinate those with PG&E to see if we can incorporate, undergrounding of their facilities as part of the construction of this.
I think a lot of my comment had to do with, trying to have that partnership with OES, because OES and Ready Nevada County has such an excellent source of single point of contact where you go and you find out about things. You don't have to go to 10 different places. And so if we can integrate more of that from PG&E into that site, that would be excellent. That was really the intention of my comment. I'm also interested, coming in late, apologize, but I'm helping to produce the update to the Nevada City safety element. And so, being a really small agency with really limited resources, we're kind of depending on our bigger regional partners like the county to come up with some of the solutions. And I know that Alex was talking about some of the exciting things that could happen, such as the fire plan and the evacuation plan that really we need. And so, just anything that you can include the Nevada City into this program, the better, because we just don't have the resources to do this on our own.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, and so again, folks, if you haven't had a chance to look at the plan, you can access it at the NCTC website. The address is in the chat, or it's www.nctc.ca.gov. And we're accepting comments up until May 1st. And then we'll also be presenting, doing a brief presentation to the Nevada County Transportation Commission at their May 18th meeting. So you can submit your comments through the project website, or if you would like to attend the Nevada County Transportation Commission meeting, it's an online Zoom meeting. It's another opportunity to provide some input on the draft recommendations and strategies. And you can find information on joining the meeting on our website as well. So just encourage you to take a look at the plan, provide some comments, and feel free to share it and have your friends and neighbors look at it as well. We appreciate the input and your feedback.
Well, with that, it sounds like maybe time to wrap up the meeting. Really appreciate everyone coming tonight and the great discussion, and we will be working with NCTC to get comments incorporated before that presentation. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me or provide your comments on the website.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for attending. And I know you're putting off dinner to spend time with us, and I do appreciate it. So thank you.
Great.